My stepmother raised her glass and said, "That's all you deserve, Jolie." Her voice sliced clean through the music, and the whole room laughed, everyone but me. My father just smiled at her like it was part of the show. I sat there, hands steady, the USB in my pocket burning against my leg. They had no idea what I'd brought with me or what I was about to do. One truth strong enough to shatter everything they'd built. Before we get into it, tap like and tell me where you're watching from. Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace, even when you knew the truth could end it all? People like to say every family has secrets. Ours didn't bother hiding them, they just called them tradition. My father, Jolie Foster, built his company from scratch. In his world, everything had to look perfect. The house, the dinners, even the smiles. My stepmother, Karen, was the masterpiece he showed off. She had this way of turning cruelty into elegance. If she insulted you, it sounded like a compliment. And then there was Shannon, her daughter, my father's golden child. I used to count how many times he said her name at dinner like it was proof that I still existed if he remembered to say mine. I grew up in that mansion in Raleigh, surrounded by chandeliers and silence. After my mother died, the air changed. Karen moved in within months, her perfume replacing the scent of my mother's lilies. The staff learned quickly, "Please, Karen, protect your job." I learned too, stay quiet, stay out of the way. Every family photo had me at the edge, half a smile, half a daughter. The only thing that ever felt real was my camera. At 16, I bought one with money I made tutoring neighborhood kids. It wasn't about art back then, it was survival. Through that tiny lens, I could frame the world how I wanted. I could zoom in on what people missed. A stray cat sleeping in the rain gutter, a hand trembling over a coffee cup. The kind of truth no one claps for, but it's still true. When I left home at 18, no one stopped me. Karen threw a polite farewell brunch like she was seeing off a house guest, not family. My father signed a check and told me to call if you need anything. I never did. Years passed. I built a career filming stories that weren't mine. Farmers losing land, veterans, rebuilding their lives, mothers raising kids alone. Real people, real pain. But every time I turned off the camera, the silence came back, whispering what I'd never filmed my own story. Then, one winter afternoon, an email arrived. "You're invited to Jolie Foster's 60th birthday celebration. Formal attire. No greeting, no signature, just that." For a full minute, I stared at the screen. And maybe this is the part where most people would delete it. I didn't, because after a lifetime of being erased, you start craving proof that you still exist. And that invitation, it felt like proof. The closer the party came, the less I slept. My apartment in Raleigh felt smaller each night, filled with half-packed gear and the steady hum of my camera charging. I told myself I was only going to film some B-roll for a new project, but we both know that was a lie. I was going to capture the truth. Then Ellen showed up, hair-messy sketchpad under one arm, the smell of turpentine trailing her like always. She dropped onto my couch and said, "You won't believe what I heard." I didn't look up at first, but her voice had that edge that meant something was about to hurt. "Shannon was at the cafe downtown," she said. "Talking to some guy, Kyle, I think. She said Dad won't suspect a thing once the papers are signed." My chest tightened. "What papers?" Ellen shrugged. "Sounded like business stuff, but I saw her screen. It had your dad's company logo on it. We stayed up all night digging." Ellen remembered a shared cloud folder she once used with Shannon for a design gig. Same password, still active. Inside were scanned contracts, emails, and a draft transfer form. Shannon and Karen planned to move my father's company shares into Shannon's name, using Kyle as their silent partner. Every message dripped with entitlement. "Dad will thank me once it's done. Jolie will stay out of it, she always does." Reading those lines was like swallowing glass. It wasn't just greed, it was the proof of every unspoken rule I grew up under. Karen wins, Shannon shines, I disappear. Ellen looked at me carefully. "You could end them with this," she said. I nodded, but the words stuck in my throat. I could already see my father's face if I exposed it. Confused, humiliated, maybe broken. For a moment, I hated that I still cared. I copied the files to a small USB drive. It clicked shut like a gun cocking. I held it in my palm until my skin felt hot. That was my truth, my weapon, my confession. When the night was over, Ellen squeezed my shoulder. "So, what are you going to do?" I stared at the city lights outside, blurry through the window. "I'm going home," I said quietly. "But this time, I'm not coming as their daughter." The morning of the party, Raleigh was wrapped in gray light, the kind that makes everything look like a memory. I packed carefully camera gear first, then the USB, then the black dress that felt more like armor than clothing. The silence in my apartment pressed against me, heavy and expectant. I whispered, "No more filming someone else's story," and closed the suitcase. The drive to the estate felt like time reversing. Same long driveway lined with trimmed pines. Same iron gate that used to groan open like a warning. But the place looked smaller now, stripped of its power. I parked under the oak tree where I used to wait for my father's approval that never came. The wind was sharp, carrying the faint smell of roses and cold money. Inside, the house glittered. Strings of lights, silver linens, champagne already flowing. Karen's voice floated across the room, warm, fake, trained for attention. She wore pearls that probably weren't hers and smiled like she owned the air. Shannon trailed behind her in a gold dress, every step rehearsed. When I appeared at the entrance, Karen's eyes flicked over me like I was an unscheduled error. "Jolie," she said, her tone sweet but taut, "you actually came." I smiled. "You invited me." "I suppose we did," she murmured. "Try not to make tonight awkward." Her words landed like ice on skin, but I didn't flinch. I'd been frozen before. My father appeared a moment later, his gray suit crisp, his confidence untouched. "Jolie," he said, sounding surprised but careful. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He smiled politely and moved on, already pulled into another conversation. That small moment, his dismissal wrapped in charm, was the crack that let the fury through. I stayed quiet through the speeches, through the toasts, through Karen's perfect act. But every time she touched his arm, every time Shannon laughed too loudly, I felt the USB in my clutch grow heavier. When the applause ended and people began to dance, I slipped down the hallway toward his office. The portraits on the wall watched as I opened the door and set the USB beside his nameplate. For the first time in years, I wasn't shaking. He found me there a few minutes later, standing by his desk, like a trespasser in my own story. The laughter from the ballroom echoed faintly down the hall, muffled by marble and distance. When he saw me, my father stopped in the doorway, one hand still on the frame. "Jolie," he said softly, as if saying my name might break something fragile. "Karen said you'd stepped out. You shouldn't be in here." "I know." My voice was steady. I just needed a quiet place. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The lamplight hit the lines on his face, the same lines I used to trace when I was little, trying to memorize him. He looked older now, but still unreadable. "You've grown into your mother," he said quietly. She used to stand in this office the same way, like she was searching for something that didn't want to be found. I let the words hang there. I wanted to tell him that what she'd been looking for was him, but I didn't. Instead, I slid the USB across the desk toward him. He frowned. "What's this?" "The truth," I said. "You deserve to see it before someone else does." His expression shifted, confusion first, then irritation, the reflex of a man used to control. "What are you talking about?" "Just watch it," I said. He sat down, muttering something under his breath, and plugged the drive into his laptop. The screen flickered to life. A video opened Ellen's recovered files stitched together. Karen's voice filled the room first. Calm, confident. "Once the transfer's approved, Gregory won't notice a thing until it's done." Then Shannon laughing. "He'll probably thank us. Dad loves being the hero." And Kyle's voice. "You're sure no one else has access to the files?" Karen again, smooth as glass. "Only us. Jolie doesn't even know where the company keeps its books. She's too busy chasing broken people with her little camera." I didn't look at my father. I watched the reflection of the screen in his glasses, the moment recognition hit him, the way his mouth parted just slightly. The illusion cracked. When the recording ended, the only sound left was the soft jazz leaking through the walls. He stayed very still, then whispered, "Dear God." I took a breath. "You always told me truth mattered. That integrity was everything. But you never asked if that included your own home." His hand trembled slightly on the mouse. "You could have humiliated us tonight," he said, voice low. Why didn't you? Because I wasn't trying to destroy you, I said. I just wanted you to see me. He looked up, then really looked. It felt like a foreign language we were both learning in real time. He reached across the desk, slow, unsure, and set his hand over mine. The gesture was clumsy, almost awkward, but it was the first real thing he'd done in years. I see you now, he said. Something inside me, tight and old, broke. Not in pain, but release. We stood there for a long moment, the air between us heavy with everything unspoken. Then quietly, he closed the laptop, picked up the USB, and said, "Stay here." When he left the office, I followed a few steps behind, far enough to stay unseen. He walked through the corridor and into the main hall. The music faltered when he appeared. He didn't speak loudly, but his presence drew every eye. "Karen," he said, voice calm but sharp as steel. She turned, smiling automatically. "Darling, everything all right?" "Not yet," he said. She blinked, the smile twitching. "What's wrong?" He held up the USB. "You tell me." For a moment, confusion crossed her face. Then fear, real fear. Her hand tightened around her champagne glass. "Gregory, what is this supposed to mean?" "I watched it," he said. "Every word." Shannon's expression froze, her golden confidence cracking. "Dad," he cut her off. "Don't." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, and the entire room went still. "You treated my trust like a currency you could spend. Both of you." Karen started to speak again, her tone turning syrupy. "Gregory, please. She's manipulating you." He pointed toward me where I stood at the edge of the crowd. "She's my daughter, and she just saved what's left of this family." The silence that followed was brutal. Karen's face drained of color. Shannon's eyes filled, but not with guilt, panic. Then came the final blow. My father reached into his pocket, pulled out 2 envelopes, and set them on the table beside the untouched cake. "One is for the divorce," he said. "The other is your withdrawal notice from the company. You'll both need to find another place." Karen's voice cracked for the first time. "You're choosing her over us." He shook his head. "I'm choosing honesty." I didn't move, didn't gloat. I just watched as the empire they'd built on charm and deceit folded in on itself. The guests shifted uncomfortably, pretending to sip their drinks, unsure whether to stay or flee. Karen's eyes found mine, then sharp, pleading, desperate. The same eyes that once made me feel small, but not this time. My father turned toward the door. "Jolie," he said, voice firm now. "Let's go." And that was it. No fireworks, no screaming. Just quiet ruin. Outside, the night air hit like a shock, cold and clean. We walked across the gravel driveway, his footsteps slow, mine steady. For once, he didn't fill the silence. Halfway to the car, he said softly, "I used to think protecting people from pain was love." He paused, eyes on the dark sky. Turns out, it was just avoiding the truth. I didn't answer. There was nothing to add. We drove away from the estate without looking back. Behind us, the lights of the mansion blurred into the distance, a glittering lie fading into darkness. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Justice didn't roar that night. It whispered. It walked quietly beside me in the dark, hand in hand with peace. 3 months passed before I saw him again. The mansion had been sold quietly, no announcements, no farewells, just an empty driveway and a for sale sign swinging in the wind. My father rented a small cabin by the lake, far from the noise, where the mornings smelled like pine, and the air carried nothing but the sound of water lapping at the dock. When I arrived, he was on the porch, coffee mug in hand, wearing a faded sweatshirt instead of a suit. "You found it," he said. I followed the silence, I replied, and it made him smile, soft, unguarded. We didn't talk about Karen or Shannon. We didn't need to. The quiet between us had changed. It wasn't made of fear anymore. It was made of peace. He brewed another cup, poured it for me, and we sat watching the light move across the lake. The same man who once measured life by quarterly reports now watched ducks drift by like it was enough. A few weeks later, he called to tell me he'd watched my latest documentary, the one about daughters who grew up unseen, who found their voices too late and used them anyway. It hurt, he admitted, but I'm proud of you. You had the courage. I didn't. That night, I stood on my balcony, overlooking the city lights, and felt something loosen in my chest. The frost that had followed me for decades was finally melting. I kept filming stories of women like me, stories of quiet revolutions. The first screening sold out a small theater downtown. When the credits rolled, people stood to clap, and I spotted him in the back row wiping his eyes. For years, I chased a kind of love that demanded silence. Now I knew better. Real love listens even when the truth hurts. I used to think revenge meant fire something loud, final, destructive. But standing there after the screening, watching strangers hug each other and whisper "me too," I realized it could look like light instead. Quiet, steady, unapologetic. That night, I packed my camera bag for the next trip. The same bag that once carried proof of betrayal now held stories waiting to be told. I glanced at the old USB drive resting on my shelf, the metal dulled from touch. I didn't keep it as a weapon anymore. I kept it as a reminder: truth doesn't need to scream, it just needs to survive. Before I turned off the lights, my phone buzzed a message from my dad. "Proud of you, kid? Don't ever dim what you've built." I smiled, slipped the phone into my pocket, and whispered to the quiet room, "Never again." Because that's the real ending, isn't it? Not the collapse of someone else's empire, but the moment you stop shrinking to fit inside it. If you've ever had to walk away from the people who refuse to see you, you're not alone. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And hit subscribe if you believe, like I do, that silence can be broken and truth, no matter how quiet, always finds its voice.